again, Erin Capps from H2O Partners here in Austin joins us. And speaking of Austin, President Trump is currently visiting the Department of Public Safety Operations Center as he continues to monitor what's going on related to Hurricane Harvey. And we're bringing Erin on to kind of get her expertise as it pertains to disaster recovery. But I just mentioned, Erin, that President Trump is here in town. And oftentimes when we think of federal government as it pertains to things like disasters, what's currently going on in Texas and elsewhere, we think of FEMA. If you could,
Right.
for those who maybe aren't exactly aware of, what does FEMA do?
Well, FEMA was enacted to set up aid, and it is aid for when it goes beyond a state level, which is the case of many natural disasters. Disaster response is at first a local effort and then a state effort, and then there's a request made of the federal government. And they have that authority through the Stafford Act. And that's sometimes you hear different provisions and codes being thrown around like 404, 406, and people are referring to the Stafford Act, which allows FEMA to have the authority to regulate. And at this level, you saw a lot of things. You kept hearing in the news, oh, well, these counties are declared. Now these counties are declared, everything else. So we have our state declarations, and then we have federal declaration once the president signs it. And everything happened very quickly here because it was obvious when it was about to make landfall that Hurricane Harvey was not going to be any typical event, and this was going to require national aid. So that request was sent fairly quickly by Governor Abbott and was signed very quickly by President Trump. And that's the usual course of business between a state governor and president in getting things signed. And then, there will be, of course, with the legislature as well, approving that aid. And FEMA will be the organization responsible. There are three main, I would call them, silos of assistance that FEMA offers. There is individual assistance, public assistance, and then hazard mitigation assistance. So the very first step is going to be individual assistance, and we can talk a little more about that because that's where we're at right now. I mean, you have, first of all, the response going on, but once people are able to start making claims and making repairs, this is how they're going to get money to do so, is through FEMA individual assistance.
Obviously, H2O Partners, you work with state and local governments. We've already mentioned FEMA. You also work with private companies. Hurricane Harvey has hit. Obviously, we see the images on television. We hear the reports. What is your advice to public sector entities or businesses in preparing for an event such as a hurricane? It doesn't even have to be the scale of Hurricane Harvey, a Cat 4. There are other disasters that companies, governments should prepare for, people should prepare for. What would be your suggestions?
Well, that's a lot of what we preach is being prepared before an event. And that's a lot of where our business comes in, is helping people to think of things to mitigate damage before it happens. So we work a lot under the arm of FEMA of hazard mitigation assistance. And this is everything from developing plans for how they're going to make mitigation work for a community, and then also public assistance, which is helping to recover for your both government-owned buildings and nonprofit entities, and then also school districts, too, can have public assistance funding. So the way to be prepared as a citizen, though, there are activities you can do for your homes, which a lot of people know about already in preparation. But one of the big things that it's going to be a huge topic as we go through Harvey is flood insurance. We have a contract to provide National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, training nationwide. And so, of course, one of the things that we do encourage is the participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. And individual homeowners sometimes do not realize that this is not covered through your homeowner's insurance. So a lot of people that unfortunately have had damage are going to be calling, their insurance agents and their providers and adjusters, and it's not going to be a positive message, because what they're going to find out is that it's not covered under the homeowner's insurance. You have to have a flood insurance policy. You have to participate in the NFIP as a community in order for your citizens to be able to purchase flood insurance. Now, of course, many of these areas are, and a lot of times people will say, well, why are we, the taxpayers, having to cover, somebody's loss? It's not my fault they didn't have flood insurance. But it's really not that easy. I mean, you could just take a poll even within your own family and friends, and you might be shocked to find out the number of people that don't have flood insurance or aren't aware of it. It's not something that is often, it should be talked about when you buy a house, but sometimes it's not. And it's difficult because when we look at the maps and how things are rated, they say, well, if this is a high-risk area, it's not mandatory for you to purchase, or you're not in a floodplain. And something we say is everybody's in a floodplain. You can always have the potential for damage, but that set aside, even, setting aside your potential risk, sometimes it's cost prohibitive for people to have flood insurance, and they think, well, that's a once-in-a-lifetime flood. And when you're looking at the level of damage from Harvey, and you're hearing numbers like, oh, this is a 2,000-year event or 800-year event, and that doesn't really help people put it in perspective of what their risk really is. I always tend to think of it as, over your mortgage, if you have a 30-year mortgage, the percent chance that you're going to have a flood, which is actually quite high, especially in central and southern Texas, and even sometimes I would say about half of the state, we should have flood insurance. So that's a big portion of what we do, trying to get people prepared. But after a flood happens, you don't have any option to go back and add. So for anybody that's listening that doesn't have flood insurance, it would be good for them to look into options to purchase that. So we're going to see a lot of this assistance for homeowners is going to have to come through FEMA, and that's going to be through that individual assistance program. And there are, several websites and resources for that where people can go. And I don't know if you've given those on this podcast before.
If you could please share maybe a couple of links that you feel would be most important to a broad audience.
Yeah, I think the most important link for people, especially those without flood insurance and even those with flood insurance, is disasterassistance.gov, and that's just www.disasterassistance.gov. And that's how you can register and start your process. And a lot of times people may not have access to the internet, so there is a way you can register by phone, and that's at 1-800-621-3362, 1-800-621-3362. And I know they're getting lots of calls, and I have been hearing from people that have been making those calls that they have been sometimes on hold for quite a while, as you can imagine, but it's just to start getting that process rolling for making a claim. In terms of the amount of money someone may get, it really just depends. It's going to depend on the amount of money that will be allocated to the disaster. And so I have seen estimates for individual assistance for homeowners from anywhere between $6,000 and $30,000, and there's a lot of things in between and some different factors as well. So that is one option for homeowners. And another area where our company comes in is with that hazard mitigation assistance. You may have heard of home buyouts, or home acquisitions, and this is also done through FEMA grants, through FEMA hazard mitigation assistance grants. A lot of homeowners, if they are in a repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss area where they've had flooding before, that's a very generic way to define it. Of course, it's a very specific term. There's a lot of conditions with that. But with that hazard mitigation assistance grant, it is some options for either elevating your home or if you want to be part of a buyout program. And that is done through your community. That's either going to be done through the city or through the county, depending on them applying for grant funds through FEMA. So that's not something as an individual homeowner, you can just go to FEMA online and say, oh, I want my home bought out, or I want to elevate my home, or, what money can I get to do this? That's going to be through local effort with your local community. And there will probably be a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that happens already within Harris County and Galveston County.
Things can be replaced, but obviously your lives are most important. Tremendous information. We will share the link in the description of the podcast. Again, Erin Capps, the VP of Operations at H2O Partners in Austin. Erin, we sure do appreciate you sharing your expertise with our audience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it too. And you're absolutely right. The most first and foremost is your health and safety and welfare. And so you take care of that first, and all of these other things will fall in line. It will take time, but there is help available, and there are, certainly resources available to continue the process, because one thing I didn't mention is that once a disaster happens, this continues with working for years and years for funding assistance and as it gets administered. So it's going to be something we're talking about for the next 10 or 15 years, but hoping that these people can recover quickly, and our hearts really go out to them at this time. And thank you so much for the time to speak on this matter.